Tell me when you're ready.
We do still expect to take another 3 times short as well. I think that's one big misconception, especially this first time. Every time we're trying. Yeah.
You ready? Yeah. Okay. All right, I will call the January 10th, 2023 Special Board of Education Study Session to order. Roll call.
Kate Thomas,
Here.
Troy Carr.
Here.
Deb Baker,
Here.
Jim Hansen,
Present.
Clay Colomb,
Here.
Jamie Clapham,
Here.
Michael Berkland.
Here.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God. All right, I need a motion for approval of agenda. Deb and Clay, roll call.
Kate,
Yes.
Troy,
Yes.
Deb,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Clay,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Michael.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
All right, moving on to items for discussion. You want to take over, Mrs. Swaggart?
Thank you, President Thomas. Throughout this year, we have been asking the directors to come and present to the board. Part of our communication piece of making sure that the board is aware of everything that we're going on and we have going on. And tonight it is the Teaching, Learning and Innovation Department's turn. So we have Miss Val Seals here to present to us about some things that are happening in her department. So I'm going to turn it over to her. Thank you, Ms. Seals, for being here.
Good evening, President Thomas and members of the board. Good evening, Jim. Thanks for joining and excited to be here. I know that some of our departments earlier on did just an overview of their department, what they are and what they do. I feel like with the session we had right over here in the conference room and other opportunities I've had over all these years to present to the board, most of you probably have a pretty good idea what Teaching, Learning and Innovation does. So I'm going to do a brief overview and then just move on to some information about assessment because it's that season and because we have a major pilot going on for assessments in the Teaching and Learning department. And so that's what I'll focus on, but I'm willing to and happy to take questions on any item. And for our newer board members, if you feel like you don't know everything TLI does, call me anytime. We'd be happy to talk about it. Okay. Let me share my screen. I'm a little nervous because you know how we mute our system. I have 2 videos embedded here. I think they'll play. I'm not positive they'll play. So it could be a 20-minute presentation or it could be 15. There we go. All right. Let me move all of our faces out of the way. All right. Again, as I said, this is a brief overview of what we do in TLI.
Really quick, can people, because it says that she's muted here, does that mean people out there can hear or can't hear her?
I have
They
my
can hear
mic
her.
on, so they should be able to hear. Yes, thank you. I'm more worried about the video being heard. We'll see how that goes. So as we speak to assessment tonight, you're going to hear about assessment for 2 purposes. One is universal screener. And we're going to walk back in history a little bit about how we came to have the universal screeners we have now. And part you'll hear about screeners as they apply to the response to intervention process. And so we have things moving and happening in those areas, but overall, what we do in the TLI office is professional development. Whether that's a school contacting us and asking to work with a grade level or a group of teachers based on content, or whether it's all the new teachers that we onboard each year, which is roughly about 140 right now. or it's sessions that we provide throughout the school year, or the courses that we offer primarily through University of Sioux Falls, because they're nice to work with as far as the master's or the advanced credit goes. So we will continue to do all those things. I oversee the Title IIA grant for our district, which is a couple $1 million grant that comes in each year. It is designed exclusively for professional development and recruiting and class size reduction. We haven't used it for class size reduction for 15 years. We could only reduce the size in our classes in a couple grades in a couple schools. So the only time we've really taken a stab at class size reduction at the elementary level in particular was when we had literacy staff employed, and during that reading block, then you would see your numbers reduced to 15 to 1 instead of 30 to 1, or 12 to 1 instead of 24 to 1. We also reduced class sizes during mathematics instruction back when we had math coaches. Neither of those came out of 2A. 2A could not have supported funding that for 15 schools. And so it is an allowable expense. It's not one that we utilize. We put our eggs in the professional development bucket to include travel to conferences, consultants, all kinds of things. Tomorrow we have our big kickoff for our senior academy, or our administrative academy with our principals. 2A is paying for that work, and that's a year-long contract that we are starting with ICLE that the board approved a couple months back. So we make good use of the funds. There's just some things that can be spent and some that can't. So for example, if we wanted all of our paraprofessionals to have some professional development on, say, signs of dyslexia, that's not allowable. Only certified staff can receive training. So that would mean any of our teaching staff, counseling staff, or any of our administrators that are licensed can use those 2A funds. No one else can. Curriculum and instruction. Curriculum is a tough word for me because it's often thought of as the books. It's more than the books. It's the state standards and the revisions and the work we do on pacing guides. It's the instructional materials. It's the assessments we use. Curriculum is a broad term, but you have all heard ad nauseum about our elementary math materials adoption. Those materials are part of the curriculum. They aren't the entirety of the curriculum. Right now, those pilots are going strong, and I know you've all been invited to attend. Thanks, Bishop Carr, for attending so far. I don't know if others have. He just happens to be the one I've run into. And, you know, those pilots are still going strong. You have the schedule. If you need anything from me, or you'd like me to join you on a visit, please ask. I'm happy to make time to do that. If I can't, Dr. Bauer or Tara Knowlton would be happy to do so too. So it's not just the review and study of materials to make sure that they have met the standards expected of instructional materials. It's also implementation planning. For those of you that have been around a while, Kate, for example, or Mr. Hansen, you'll remember when we adopted Wonders, which was a shift from the balanced literacy approach we were so familiar with to more of a foundational skills. The PD that we put behind that was massive, and the continuing implementation planning to include walkthrough tools and training of our administrators, et cetera, was really a 3-year process. And now in 2 more years, we'll be looking at reading materials again. I just can't believe it, how fast the time goes. And that's all related to the standards adoptions and updates provided by the state. They are on a 6-year cycle. Typically, we follow them on a 6-year cycle. That's not always been the case. Science and social studies might be a bit behind the curve right now, so we are too. And we find ourselves extending licenses, so we have the latest and greatest when the standards are approved. And sometimes we step out of the cycle, like we did with elementary math, because of student performance, because we know that the changes to the standards will be minimal. There's a multiple set of reasons why we might make that happen. Instruction is included in here as well. Instructional strategies, evidence-based grading, teaching and learning and innovation supports all those initiatives and many others. We support the implementation of Canvas for the district. Our digital educators are great resources for some of the technological aspects, but as far as creating great blended learning opportunities, that falls on the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Innovation. Assessment will be again our focus tonight. We support district mandated, state mandated, and all other assessments other than those formative assessments that teachers or PLC teams create. And so we'll take a deeper dive there. Intervention, you've heard from Dr. Hafer and from others and had presentations on the RTI handbooks at our elementary and middle schools. Those have undergone a complete revision. We've identified universal screeners. We've changed the materials that we're using, for example, in elementary reading and math for our intervention in tier 2 and 3. All of that has been an ongoing process, and we are currently in the high school. The tough part about the high school is intervening on what? We have a lot of discussions about, are we trying to fix a behavior, like not completing work? Or are we trying to intervene on a skill deficit? So that committees were, wrestling with that question and others, but you'll hear assessment come up as it relates to RTI as well, because the current assessments we have in high school really wouldn't be great for progress monitoring or for identifying skill gaps. And so I'll put a little plug in on that as well. And then finally, reporting. My department does the compilation of data for the data retreats that we do each summer. We've booked those for July 31st, August 1st and 2nd for this summer, and that will be based on this year's data that we are putting together. We facilitate the report card committees and the evidence-based grading work and many policy revisions. And then finally, teacher evaluation still lies in human resources, but when I came out of human resources, I was asked if I would take teacher evaluation, the process and the training of our administrators to provide evaluations. And so that still lives in the Office of Teaching, Learning and Innovation as well. Before I go into the meat of my presentation, if you have anything you'd like to add here, I'm happy to stop. And then for assessments, I'll just keep going until we make it to the end and there's time for questions and comments. Okay. State of assessment usage in Rapid City area schools. We're going to talk about our elementary schools, our middle schools, and our high schools. I know, I'm just going to preface this by saying, I know you hear a lot about assessment. We give too many, we don't give enough. They climb on top of each other, they're spread apart too thin. I just want to give a couple points of feedback to the things I've heard about assessment. If a teacher or group of teachers use the assessment at question, regardless of what it is, to guide instruction, you hear far less pushback on that assessment. So for example, as we talk about the potential of maybe looking outside of Acadience for a universal screener, Knollwood teachers would probably come to you crying about that. They use the Acadience assessment data routinely and to drive instructional decisions, and they've really gotten good at interpreting those data reports. That may not be the case at another elementary school that prefers something else, but that is the case. Everyone has a different opinion about it. And I would just say, as you look at our assessment model for the district K-12, we are actually on what most of our consultants have identified as a slimmer assessment model. We have the state mandated, the district mandated, and then most of the rest is formative and assessments that teachers create. Part of the bottleneck that we'll hear in spring, and I guarantee you'll hear about it, is that the SBAC window is in the spring, and then the spring map testing is in the spring, and Acadience final spring testing occurs around that time too. The one thing that I continue to encourage our building administrators who set the testing schedule within their own building along the parameters identified by the district and the state is to be very thoughtful in how you schedule those. For example, we were at a building this week that was doing Acadience testing. That's why those teachers were sitting on the floor and some members of my team were sitting out on the floor. They decided to just get it done and move on. And so they're map testing at the same time, and that works for that school. Probably wouldn't work if SBAC was thrown in the middle of that as well, but SBAC's window is 6 weeks. There's no reason for students to be testing in all those areas concurrently. It just takes a little planning to iron that out. Not saying in any manner that the assessments we have are the perfect assessments. Some decisions are being made about that regarding Acadience in particular. That's the one assessment that we have that is still knee to knee, as we call it, where you pull up a desk or a piece of carpet in the hallway and you test a student knee to knee. You hear them read you aloud. You score their reading assessment manually. those are time consuming. If you're the classroom teacher, you learn a lot about your students in those assessments. If you're a member of TLI, you just get data to enter for the teacher. And again, it comes to whether or not that teacher uses that data, whether or not they'll find that assessment beneficial. One of the things about MAP fluency that you'll see in, further on in the presentation is it takes that one-on-one factor out. It replaces the teacher sitting with the student with a piece of technology sitting with the student. And I know we have feelings about that as well, but I have a short video that'll show you what the assessment looks like. We administered it last week at Rapid Valley and at Corral Drive. And it's very interactive and the students love talking to the computer. This is the first chance Kinder First or Second has been able to do that. So you'll see a sample of what that looks like, but it takes, 10 to 15 minutes per student for Acadians testing, math and reading, 20 minutes all told with MAP, and you can do the whole classroom at the same time. So there's just some considerations and we'll get deeper into that. So here we go.
Ms. Seals,
Mhm.
that was going to be my end of the assessment question. So thank you for starting off that way.
I know the burning questions.
Yes. So with all that being said, then how do we as a district come to some consensus on what to test, how much to test, when to test? Because as you said, I mean, it's different from individual, it's different from building, it's different from need. So how do we put that all together to, I mean, everybody's not going to be happy, but we still hear, as a board member, I still hear, which you've said. So is there an answer? Is there not an answer? And I'm okay with some situations, just
It is
that's what it is.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you
I
can't
can tell
really-
you elementary is most assessment heavy, probably. I mean, that's been long going. We had an assessment committee that had teachers from throughout the district that were, the committee was facilitated by myself and I believe Dr. Gaden at the time, looking at the assessments we used and what we could remove to make room for others that we needed. And that's always a huge debate as well, to be honest with you. We don't reach full consensus in those conversations typically as it relates to assessment. But I think the slide that I have up in front of me now, and let me see if I can. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you. This does a pretty good job of explaining what assessments we have and what their purpose is. So I'm gonna zoom out. That's too big. I don't like it. Let's try this. We have norm referenced and criterion referenced assessments. That's the first column. It's the pre-ACT 9 through 10, the ACT in grade 11, the South Dakota SCI and the SBAC. Okay, the district mandated tests in here are the ACT and the pre-ACT. SCI and SBAC are mandated by the state. We won't get rid of those. Prior to mandating the ACT in our high schools, they had no mandated exams beyond what were required by the state Department of Ed. So to have a temperature check of the performance of our students, we were relying solely on a test that our juniors took through SBAC. I mean, we could look at ACT scores, but those were only the scores from students that elected to take the ACT in an off-site testing location. And that's certainly not representative of our demographic at large. And so this is year 2 of administering the ACT. We are going online with the ACT for juniors. We are sticking with paper and pencil for now with the pre-ACT. Pre-ACT occurs twice a year, fall and spring, and the ACT is just that one. Now, I know a lot of families looking at our ACT scores because I have access to that. As the district, we do receive student scores. If they're enrolled in one of our entities, we get an upload of their scores from other testing occurrences. Some students are taking it 5 to 6 times to hit that optimal score. They just are. And so this one time that we give it to them probably isn't going to be that one time that they want to retrieve and save. They can always retake on their own, and many do. But it opens the door for all students to take the exam. There is a component for college and career planning and just what to do next. And also an interest survey that gives us good data on what our students are really thinking their post-secondary plans are. And so I have in my notes to talk a little bit about ACT was selected for our high schools as opposed to MAP, because MAP does go through 12th grade. Because at the time, our CCR director was Melissa Miller-Kinkart. And between her and I, the thinking was, and our high school principal at the time, was that SBAC at the 11th grade, there's not a lot of buy-in. And you'll hear administrators say that, you know, it's a test that none of the kids care about. And maybe Michael, you could attest to that. We figured MAP growth might be the same thing. MAP growth isn't going to get you into college. MAP growth isn't going to get you a scholarship. And so we went with ACT. That's a 3-year commitment. That commitment is again in year 2. So the 23-24 school year will be the end of the commitment, and we'll need to make some decisions as to whether we carry on with that or not. MAP, we committed for 5 years because MAP was willing to. So there's a difference there. We have some benchmark assessments. That's the next column, and I'm going to zoom out a little more so my circles are in place. Maybe a little more. Our benchmark assessments are our MAP assessments. We give those to all students in grades 3 through 8. Some schools give the SBAC interim. That is not required by the district. Some schools just want that data, and some schools still want that data even though they're using the MAP test. And so that's a school-wide decision. The purpose of a benchmark assessment is to measure group performance against an established set of standards. And so that's what role MAP is playing for us. It's a dual role, I would say, because for grades 3 through 8, it is our universal screener too. Common formative assessments are those assessments you've heard about if you've been on the board for any length of time. It's teacher talk largely. But when we say common formative, they're on the fly assessments to a point. They measure what the student's knowledge is on the given work of the content area, but the team sets them together. So if I was still teaching 3rd grade, like I used to at Knollwood, we might be working on fractions, and we don't want to give the unit exam that comes with investigations. We just want to know right now what our students know and understand about fractions. So we might write a common formative assessment and use it for our next PLC meeting as a data source. The common is in that it's not just one teacher giving it to her students. And then classroom assessments, of course, are teachers' version of formative assessments. They're typically around the state standards because that's what the teachers are teaching to. And those are on the fly as well. They may spend time creating an entire 3-page test if it's the high school level. It might be 2 questions on a note card if it's a 2nd grade student. So those vary broadly, but the purpose for those is to provide the teachers and the students feedback on how they're doing at the task at hand right now. So it's that feedback is critical to driving their learning. And so formative assessments are very important. Just because they're optional doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing them. But I think it paints a pretty good picture of what's district and state required at this point and what is just a matter of good teaching. Then the final column is our universal screeners. I don't know why MAP's not in this heading. It's my error. Acadience is used for reading grades K-5. Acadience is used only K-2 for math. And in grades 3 through 8, MAP is used for both math and reading. Our middle schools use it heavily. So for example, 6th grade reading is required, but if a student takes reading in 7th grade, it's based on their performance on SBAC, on their MAPS test, and teacher recommendation, basically. We want to know if they have met that board requirement of reading at least 1,000 Lexile prior to getting on into high school. Other considerations, digging a little deeper, we'll go into elementary assessment. Back in 2015 was our initial time with Acadience. That was 18 years ago. At the time, Acadience was only used with special ed students. It was when Dr. Gaydon was new to his position. It was clear that the dyslexia task force of the state, the RTI process of the federal and state government, and just good teaching practice requires that you have some sort of universal screener. The universal screener identifies students that may be in need or currently are in need of remedial support or additional support to find the success they want and to reach the benchmark that we hope they reach during the academic year. We adopted in 2018-19 Acadians for all of our elementary students. That was for math or for reading only. I apologize. And we started using it with the 6,000 elementary students we have. That's that need and the assessment I was talking about. It has robust data. It has the pie charts that some of our board members in the past have hated. But it gives good information about where your students are and where you can work with them next instructionally. And again, it's just whether or not that data is being used. There's progress monitoring in Acadians as well. That's not required by the district. It's encouraged. And many of our staff use that, many don't. In 2021, we had the pandemic interruptions, but we also had ESSER funding. So we had a door open for us that we have long wanted to open. We have not had good secondary assessments, and even in some cases, elementary standards-based assessments for many, many years. While all the other districts were taking on MAP, we didn't, because we knew at $12.50 a student a year, we just couldn't do it. And so ESSER funds allowed us to do that large purchase of MAP 3.8 for 5 years. And it was really a blessing. It honestly was. We've done tremendous amounts of training in the TLI department because we train people on interpreting the reports, on using those reports for instruction, and how administrators and teachers alike can learn more about their students, whether it be by content area, grade level, or down to individual students. In 21-22, we took on math K2 as our universal screener Acadians, because there's always been that hint of concern about putting a primary student in front of a computer, you know, especially in kindergarten. Are we testing their ability to use a computer, which some of them have no background, or are we, you know, really getting a clean picture of what the student knows and is able to do? And so that decision was made with a group of teachers, and we moved forward with that. So that's why we have a split. We're MAP 3 up, or Acadians K5, but we only do Acadians K2 in math. It's confusing if you don't spend time with it, but that's where we are right now. This pilot would rectify some of that, but it also comes at a price, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. 21-22 was the adoption, again, of MAP. It's a math, reading, and science assessment. There's a language component too if teachers choose to use it. The district does not require that. And it was just 22-23 school year when we started piloting in our primary grades. We have a pilot going on currently in growth, MAP growth out at Rapid Valley, and then MAP fluency at South Park and Corral Drive. And I'll tell you more about that. So let's talk about Acadians, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, Acadians is excellent at measuring foundational skills that research has shown are necessary for students to become actual readers. It's very good at it. Dyslexia as a universal screener. We're able to assess all students in foundational skills. This was the assessment that we picked in response to the dyslexia task force at the state level, and many other districts did as well. We're happy with that. There's, again, just the paper, pencil, and the time really are the main considerations there. It is heavy on the training requirements. When we adopted Acadians for our elementary students, we did in TLI 6 days of training to be certified trainers, so that we could take that training out to our teachers at large. And when you talk about elementary teachers, we have 450 of them. So all classroom teachers, literacy teachers, and interventionists have been trained in this, which is great. You have that hump year, you get it done, but then there's 80 new elementary teachers each year, and they still need the training. We have done our best to stay in line with the requirements for training that Acadians has in place. And we have reduced that training down to 1.5 days for teachers, but still 1.5 days. If you're going to be administering both reading and math, you have to do that 1.5 day training. You get a certificate that you're an ALICE certified assessment deliverer, and we move on from there. And of course, what we've already talked about, the administration takes time. In grades K through 5, it's approximately 6 minutes a student. In grades 1 through 8, it can go up to 11 minutes a student. It just really depends on how well the student performs. The better their reading skills, the longer it's gonna take to assess them because they don't tap out, if you will. They can keep going. 2 to 2, 8 in second grade, 2 to 8 minutes for math. 4 minutes to grade on top of that, and 3 to 5, 6 minutes per student in math. So our buildings with MTSS supports had significantly more time to implement the support systems that utilize Acadian's data. For those of you that weren't here, we had an MTSS grant. Dr. Gaden started it, and 8 of our elementary schools had MTSS coaches that really, really helped them dig into using the data from Acadians, in addition to what the district provided through TLI. Those schools are all much more receptive to the assessment, I would say, because they know how to use the data and they do use the data. But that leaves 7 schools that didn't have that. They just had what we were able to offer with pre-service days and with additional pay for the other large amount of staff. Fidelity is always a concern. If you have 100 teachers delivering an assessment, we do have a quick crash course that's virtual in Canvas for teachers to watch the videos. Here's how you do this, here's how you score that. But there's operator error. I mean, there's just discrepancy when you do a test that way. So while if we're following everything to dot our I's and cross our T's, it has high fidelity. But I would assume the longer we go with this, the more comfortable people get, and their scoring might lapse. They might, take shortcuts. I can't guarantee that. There's far too many students and teachers out there that administer this test to guarantee that. The cost of Acadians is increasing, but it will never exceed, or not in the near future, exceed the cost of MAP products. Right now, currently, we pay $2.50 for a K2 student who does both Acadians math and reading. We pay $1.50 for those 3-5 students that only do Acadians reading. Now that is changing. Their systems are changing. It's still going to be a need-to-need test, but it's going to double in cost. We expect to pay $4.50 next year moving forward. So that's a significant increase. Still doesn't get into the ballpark of MAP, but we'll get there too. Let's jump on to our MAP pilots and a little information about those. MAP fluency is a test that is only of reading. So we are piloting that, and teachers are excited about that because it really is good at measuring foundational skills as well as oral reading fluency for those students that have moved on from pre-reading to reading. But it doesn't have a math component. So we would still be looking for our universal screener, or would continue using MAP or Acadians math for our universal screener. It does have a dyslexia screener built in. It is more expensive. It's $7.50 per student. And there are no accesses to diagnostics for classroom teachers. We also are piloting MAP growth. MAP growth assesses foundational skills. I've seen it administered now out at Rapid Valley. And what's interesting is for our kindergarten students, they told us to start them at a certain point in the test, because by now, most of the students may have picked up some reading skills, or many of the students might have. If you assign just the foundational skills, it will never adjust up. But if you assign reading skills, it will always move down if need be. So students are all given a passage, even kindergartners, to try to read. And if they can't read it, we say, look at the picture. What do you think the story is about? And they say that. And immediately the computer, boom, drops them down to what letters do you know on the screen, that kind of information. So it is adaptive. But the recommendation of the publisher is that you start at the midline for your students once you've hit the middle of the year. Our kindergarten students would not be handed a passage to read if we were doing this pilot in the fall, but that's where we are. And so positives with MAP growth, it will work as a universal screener. It has diagnostics for math and reading. Dyslexia indicators need to be set within the program. It is far more expensive than Acadians. MAP growth is $12.50 per student. And so $12.50, $7.50 for fluency, and $4.50 next year for Acadians, we assume.
That's $12.50. Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I thought
That's
so, but-
discount pricing for large districts. If you go just look at what other places are paying, it might be different. But that's the price that they've been willing to give us. And my most recent quote was this fall when we knew we were gonna start looking at this.
And is that per student per year?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure I got all that. Okay.
So when you talk about 6,000 elementary students and 3,000 middle school students, you can just see the, the price tag spinning. That said, it's a very good assessment. And we need to have good assessments if we're going to target instruction and make improvements in our students' academic achievement. We do. You can't guess where students are. You can't know where all your students are to the definitive level that an assessment like MAP would provide to you. So it is important. I'm not kidding when I say it's expensive. But I think most building administrators and teachers would say they'd hate to see it go away at this point. And we're only 1.5 years in with it. We still have, the 5 years that we purchased for the grades we purchased for. We're learning more each time. TLI continues to host learning sessions with building principals and teachers about data interpretation and data protocols. We are doing trainings on how you might use this data in a quick PLC meeting with, your colleagues now that it's the winter assessment, which is different than the spring assessment or the fall. So we continue to support it. Teachers continue to learn more. And to be honest with you, we use it for other areas. We use it for placement of alternative instruction students because the legislature requires that we have a standardized test that we give to students that enroll to us from an unaccredited source. We use it for placement into high school coursework in our middle schools because we need to have some idea that the student has the math skills to be successful in algebra before they hit high school. And so it has many uses, but primary is to drive instruction and instructional decisions. Let's see. And try this. This is a video that's going to show you map reading fluency and what it really looks like for a student. They're a little heavier on, I'm going to guess, second grade. This is definitely not a kindergartner taking the test, but you can see how it works. One requirement with this test that I didn't mention, it does require headphones, which all our elementary students have, but it requires a boom mic too, because they don't have to be able to read to take this test. They can talk to the computer and the computer's talking to them. They can make letter sounds to the computer and the computer can judge if they said the right sound. So they have to have that mic and those cost $20 a piece. We purchased 90 for the sake of this pilot. I've talked to Shane Daniel about that. That's something that he thinks will have a shelf life of up to 5 years. But it's something we would have to consider. I would never say we need one for every kid that goes to our elementary schools, but I think you're going to need a set for every grade level at every school. And so that would be our recommendation if this is something we move forward with.
Hi! Today we're going to do some special work on the computer. Let's check it out. You're going to read out loud into your microphone. First, we need to make sure I can hear you. Click the green circle, then say, I am ready.
I am ready.
That's great! I can hear you. Now, get ready to read out loud. Now, I'll show you a whole story. Click the green circle when you're ready to start. Click it again when you finish reading.
I'm going to pause it right here. You're going to
Start reading out loud.
this. And this is where they recommended we start our kindergartners. Many, many, many of our kindergartners are not going to read these passages.
No.
But if they got the word bed, because they can put together bed from the word, because they've done their CVC words to a point, and the picture, and they say bed, it knows that. It knows that, hey, we are picking up some words. But if they just look at it and say, he wears yellow pajamas, okay, they're picking that up too. And the next question they see will be foundational skills. So I don't want you to think that this is something that we're doing with kindergartners. Again, I think this might be a second grade sample, but this is what it looks like.
Ken wakes up. He is still in bed. The sun is up, but the shade is down. Ken gets out of bed. He opens the shade. The street looks very odd. It is all white. Why is the road all white? He asks. His mom smiles. Today is a snow day.
Does that give you PTSD?
You're doing great! Let's do something a little different. Read the sentence and find the matching picture. Now, let's do sentences for 2 minutes. Get ready and begin.
The 2 minutes is because they're looking for their fluency. They're reading quietly to themselves, but how quickly can they do that and determine what the sentence is speaking about?
You're a rock star! Here's something new. Next, I'll show you a whole passage. Do your best reading. Afterwards, I'll ask you some questions. Click the green circle when you're ready to start. Click it again when you finish reading. Start reading out loud.
Each year, Miss Nelson's class went to a small farm for a learning trip. Most of the students lived in the city, and so many of them had never been to a real farm. Some had read...
Which picture best shows what happened in the story? What does the story say that corn is often used for? Food for farm animals.
That's a verbal
What
tip.
probably happened just after the end of the passage?
Question says.
Blend the sounds together to make a word. D,
Where it said
mm.
it just depends on the student and
Drum.
what they brought forth.
Rack. Add the t sound to the beginning of the word rack. Rake. Track. Skip.
Use the computer to assist them in hearing what the word would sound like.
The gym teacher asked Carlos to lead us all in the next stretch. Great work! That's all for today. See you next time. You're doing great. Let's do something a little different.
Sorry.
Read the sentence and find the matching picture.
There we go. So that's map reading fluency. Again, lower cost, $7.50 per student. It's only going to look at reading skills. It has a dyslexia screener. You would only administer the dyslexia screener under their recommendations if a student was flagged after taking the initial assessment as being a student that might be in need of additional support. It is not a dyslexia test. If they take the screener and there's still signs that the student might be someone with a SLD or maybe just, hasn't had the background if we're talking about kindergartners. If you wanted to test for dyslexia, you wouldn't use map fluency, but it will identify certain skill gaps in students and you move forward with what your district uses from that point. Map growth, again, $12.50 per student, does both math and reading, has the skills checklist that would allow progress monitoring, has a lot of things that map fluency doesn't have, to be honest with you. We just were always a little hesitant to see what it would look like in K through 2. So last week we got to see, I'll just give you a brief look at that assessment. Board members, some of you have seen parts of this.
Map growth measures what your child knows and how they are growing academically. This assessment was created by NWEA, a not-for-profit organization. NWEA was founded in 1977 by educators and researchers with a mission of partnering to help all kids learn. More than 9 million students in the US and in 140 countries worldwide use Map Growth. Most schools give Map Growth tests in the fall, winter, and spring. The test is adaptive, which means that it adjusts to each student's responses. If a student gets a question right, it gets harder. If a student gets a question wrong, it gets easier. The test is not concerned with which grade a student is in. It will go as high or low as it needs to. This helps you see if your child is testing above, below, or right at their grade level in all types of subjects, including math, reading, language usage, and science. Students receive an individual RIT score at the end of the test. Map Growth measures student performance with our RIT scale, the most stable and mature scale in the industry. This scale measures and tracks performance across grade levels, so you'll be able to see your child's growth from year to year and over multiple years. Another great thing about the RIT score is that you can connect it to online resources. For example, you can get book suggestions based on a student's reading level and use free sites like Khan Academy, which provide practice exercises based on your child's learning needs. NWEA also has a College Explorer tool that lets you enter your child's RIT score to see which colleges they can likely get into. Teachers also get a student report after the test. This report explains what the students know and helps the teacher and the student set goals for learning. Every 3 years, NWEA provides schools with norms. This is anonymous data for more than 10 million students around the country. It tells teachers and students the top, middle, and bottom scores of all of these students combined, so they can compare where a student is to other students and help them grow. A teacher can then say to a student, "Wow, you're in the 98th percentile. What kind of work will keep you challenged?" Or, "You're in the 50th percentile for math. Let's look at where you need help." Map Growth improves both teaching and learning by giving teachers accurate information about your child. For more information about Map Growth, visit nwea.org.
I think it's important to point something out because you're pretty familiar if you've been around for even this year that we use MAP and then we use it 3.8. And we're branching into using it at the high school with certain students that are enrolling to us. We always worried about how that standards-based assessment would work with our primary students. What we really didn't understand at the time when we were taking on MAP testing is that for K2 students, Map Growth really does test foundational skills if that's where the student's at. Now, MAP does recommend that even a third grader that is at the foundational skills level be allowed to take the, normal assessment, not a K2 assessment. So when you go into the testing engine itself, like when I have to pick the tests that are going to be administered here during this window right now, for our K2 teachers, you would assign the foundational skills test. And if students exceed that, it will go up. But for our 3 through 8 students, for example, if I assign the 3 through 8 math, it's actually 3 through 5 math, it will not branch down into those foundational skills. It wants to keep them at or close to grade level. So we're learning more about what MAP can and can't do as we've used it for 1.5 years, I guess is my only answer to that. So it is a viable option for our K2 classrooms. It will do foundational skills. It costs more. We don't need the headphones as a bonus because students all have headphones and students don't talk to MAP Growth. They only speak to MAP Fluency because of the oral reading components to that test. Middle school is going to be short and sweet. We have limited assessments there. Before we were even more limited, but as you know, we do SBAC, we do the state science assessment at grade 8. In addition, we do NAEP testing. I didn't put that on here because it only occurs when NAEP tells us it's going to occur. And this year, the middle schools are the schools that were selected at Rapid City to take the NAEP test. We are required by the South Dakota Department of Ed to participate in that, but it doesn't give us student data that we can use. It can tell you 4th graders are here compared to other 4th graders, but there's no actionable data or student-based data. And then finally, we were using Scholastic Reading Inventory and Math Inventory. to monitor students to determine which students might need extra support, like a math lab class or a reading lab class. We used it for placement into high school algebra for those 8th grade students that are accelerated. But we've transitioned to MAP so that we have some consistency from our elementary to our middle schools. And we're very happy with what we're seeing with that. I think all of our principals would agree or vouch for that as well. It just is better information than what we were receiving previously. High school assessments, fairly short and sweet as well. I've already talked through ACT and how it came to be that we did that instead of MAP, so I won't say much about that. But I will talk a little bit about MAP again, just in that alternative instruction students again, just so we're all clear. The legislature passed a year and a half ago, I would say now, language that said that for students enrolling from a non-accredited source, such as alternative instruction, that we need to have a standardized test that we give them to place them in their math and their ELA classes. So a parent might have been straight homeschool, didn't use any outside vendors, didn't use any outside providers. They just homeschooled their student. That's great. They can type up a transcript and say, this is the content that I provided my student. That's great too. We can transfer those credits and most often will in further discussion with the parent. But what we really need to know, so we're not doing a disservice to our students that are enrolling with us or, to the diploma process in general, is we really need to know, have you met the standards of Rapid City area schools for math, and have you met it for English? And so those are the, the 2 topics that the legislators selected. We are using MAP because we have additional licenses right now. But as we work on RTI, which is the middle column, we do need a program that will allow us to see students' skill deficits. And this is in regards to tier 2 and tier 3 at the high school, not related to behavior, not related to any of that, true academic skill deficits, how to identify them and how to measure progress. And so MAP seems like a likely answer to that. ACT certainly isn't. But that, that committee continues to work and continues to look, so more to come on that. Our reading and bridge courses, we have an English 9R, which is a reading emphasis on an English course at both of our schools at their request, that we get rid of that reading and just turn it into English R with a reading emphasis. And so we've done that. In the past, the reading inventory was the only Lexile score we used, but MAP does provide a Lexile score as well. The board's policy, the district's policy, is that all students have to meet a 1000 or about a 9th grade Lexile level to graduate from our high schools. And so those students that make it through middle school still haven't hit that 9th grade reading proficiency level will find themselves in an English 9R. And reading inventory is used by the lab teachers still because they like it. But MAP is a viable option as well. And the students come into high school as 8th graders with current MAP tests from the spring. So that's something we can look at moving forward. There is no formative means in SRI or MI that we would utilize to progress monitor. And so again, that kind of brings us back to potentially MAP, but the committee needs to decide. I think I had some notes on here I wanted to just mention. I've gone over prices enough that I bet they're kind of embedded in your brain. Again, the pilot of MAP growth is at Rapid Valley in a single kindergarten 1st and 2nd grade classroom. We chose to do that because A, we already are familiar with MAP growth. We just didn't know what it looked like primary. And B, we didn't want to exceed our licenses. And so we're using just the extra licenses. When we say we have roughly 1,000 students each grade level, well, yeah, some grade levels are above that and some are below. So you end up with a few extra licenses. That's how we made that decision. MAP fluency is being piloted with all the K2 students at Corral Drive and at South Park. So last Friday, my team and I went and supported those teachers and administered for the teachers the test in their classrooms. We had about 300 students that we assessed on fluency, and it was a blast, but oh my gosh, I was tired at the end of the day. It's been a while since I've been a primary teacher. So I admire their work, as we were saying yesterday, Bishop Carr. So it was great. We aren't done with phase 1 of the pilot because we have South Park this Friday. We will do that same test again in the spring with South Park and with Corral Drive, because we want to see what kind of growth we will measure And we also want to compare it to our Acadians data. I mean, if we're truly going to do a comparison and a cost analysis, Acadians is only $450 per student. What does MAP give us that Acadians doesn't? What's the value of teachers' time and having to sit need a given assessment versus administering it to the whole class at the time? We're never going to reach district consensus or hear all 450 voices on that topic, but TLI will do our best to listen to all the teachers involved in the pilots and bring forth a recommendation to DDL. And eventually that will come forth to the board and to instructional council and then the board this spring, late spring, when we finish the pilots. So I've talked way longer than I thought I would. I guess I had a lot to say. I apologize. Luckily, I'm the only show tonight. So questions?
Anybody have any questions? I don't see any hands yet.
I know you do.
Yes, go ahead, Michael Berglund.
Can you talk a little bit about the kind of data and the timelines of when we get the data from like MAP and Acadians? Because like, I'll talk about the high school a little bit as to kind of tell you what I mean. Like the ACT, we get those results pretty fast, but it's a multiple choice test, so we don't get quite as broken down, whereas the SBAC takes way too long to get them. But it's a little bit more specific about like, we're really struggling exactly with fractions or whatever. So at the elementary level, do MAP and Acadians provide kind of different things like that?
So Acadians has great reporting in the acadians.net website. That's free of charge. We don't do the work to make those pretty reports. That's done in Acadians. And it's a matter of as soon as you enter your data. So there's different sub-assessments within Acadians. And let's say it's the maze. Well, the maze is a whole class administration. It's the only piece of the test that's whole class. And as soon as those teachers enter their maze results, or we enter their maze results for them, or their literacy specialist or whoever does it, those are available immediately. So we are in Acadian Sweep Week right now. Makeups will be next week. We let some makeups trickle in and then everything's available to us. But an individual teacher, if they know they've put their results in or that their literacy specialist has, they have them in a day. Same is to be said for MAP. A lot of times it's the same day. Sometimes it takes overnight to process. And for rostering with MAP, it's very nice as well. We do a system upload each night. We've worked closely with IT to get all the technology in order. And so it's a clever login now. If a student enrolls today, they're not going to have access to the test, but tomorrow they will. And so that works. We have, a lot of transition in our district as far as students. And so it's really quick turnaround. Whereas SBAC is, a little more cumbersome. Agreed.
And how drilled down is that data? Like, does it?
I
how
would
specific
love
does
to
it get?
show you my reports book in MAP.
That would be great.
You would be fascinated by
It
it.
would be.
It to the molecular level.
Awesome.
And in mathematics in particular, in grades 3 through 5, we use MAP Accelerator. That was a partner product we purchased. And in grades 6 to 8, we use it too, but we only use it for about 40% of the students. And I'll tell you why. That we went with Carnegie at our middle schools, and Carnegie has Mathia. And we want our students meeting their Mathia requirements or they're not getting the full curriculum. And so we didn't purchase for all students, but we did purchase for a percentage of students that might find themselves in RTI. What Accelerator does, it's con lessons, but it's the engine driving the con lessons is the MAP assessment itself. So if a student did really well in number sense, but really poorly in geometry, it's automatically going to feed them towards those lessons. And so it works in each of the domains of mathematics, and it's phenomenal. Teachers love it. And it's being used really heavily in win time because you hear from our teachers, how do you differentiate for 30 kids who have different needs in reading than they do in math? And so it's a great program. We're very happy to have it. That's a separate license, and MAP would only sell it to us for 3 years. So you're going to see or hear a request probably at the end of next academic year for an extension on MAP Accelerator. It's a great tool. There is no such equivalent for reading, unfortunately, but things continue to change. So we'll see what happens with that. MAP Fluency itself didn't exist not that long ago. So, they're continuing to move and grow and provide additional supports to districts that are making it a lot easier to individualize for our students like we know we need to. We don't want to rely too heavily on technology, but if we use it smartly, it does some things for us that we can't personally do ourselves, I guess is what I'd give it.
Awesome. So kind of going to that fidelity thing, whatever you want to get out of it. You can
Yeah.
go all the way down, or it gives you a broader picture as well.
It gives you district level even, like
Awesome.
your average performance of your fourth grade students, and that's 1,000 kids.
Right.
Or I can break it down to the classroom level, the student level, whatever I want by ethnicity. So it's very good.
Awesome. Thank you.
We, I should probably say this too, we upload all the scores from SBAC, ACT, math inventory, reading inventory, all those and Acadians into Skyward. So when a student moves, even though the teacher won't have that old class roster, most of their assessment data moves with them in the engines themselves, but it all lives in Skyward. So like when I go to Family Access, my only remaining public school kid is Charlie. I can see everything Charlie's done since he was at Wilson. Because we've been uploading those scores. It used to back in the day be those blue cards and green cards we carried around. Those are gone. We built a system where we put everything into our student management program, and it's working really well.
Jamie,
Just a question on, I had some alternative instruction parents, so if there is a student who is maybe homeschooled, can they, like, knowing the dates of testing at their school, could they be tested? Like, can a parent have them assessed to see where they are, like knowing that we're paying per student? I didn't know if there's.
That's
there's
the
anybody
exact
who-
problem right
that's
there.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Now, right now, we're using the overages. It's not uncommon for alternative instruction students to have a point in time where they're going to take some or all of their classes with us, depending on the student. I was talking about how we're using that for placement as the legislature is requiring. We have enough overage now for that, but one of the asks that we will have in the spring is to get likely MAP licenses for the high school to cover RTI and to cover those alternative instruction students and other things that we just need a better measure. It's not going to be SAT or ACT, and it's not going to be SBAC. So even then, we're still paying for them. We try to play it pretty close. When you're paying $12.50 a license, you want to be pretty accurate on the number of licenses you purchase. So Sharon's my friend. She gives me enrollment numbers, and then we compare it to what Skyward says, and we do our best bet, and they're always happy to let us buy more if we need.
Michael, did you have another? Okay. Anybody else? Questions? Go ahead, Deb.
So you said that we can fully train these teachers in a day and a half. Are they fully?
For
trained?
Acadians,
For Acadian.
yes.
What about MAPS? How do we do that one? How do we train them for that?
We did training, okay, a year ago, August. I brought in MAP consultants because it was new to me too. Who am I going to train on it? Because I didn't know anything. We brought in consultants and we asked each building to come administrator and their leadership team for a training that would give at least a cohort of staff that well understood MAP from reporting to administration. And we did that in August, right before the return date for teachers. And so we offered them additional pay. I can't make the people go to that, but luckily virtually every leadership team was present for that. From there, we ran consecutive Zoom rooms, like for all first grade, all second grade, all third grade, just enough to, here's how you administer the test, and here's the guide, and here's the video that's going to show you what to do. We provided all that to teachers, but we didn't do extensive training. Where we've spent the most time is on training on interpreting data. Because all these assessments are great, but if you can't interpret the data and use it to drive instructional decisions, we might as well not have the data. I mean, I get that we're required to have a universal screener. We're required. We are required to have and ethically, we should have something that tells us what kids know and what they are able to do and what we need to work on with them. But
So you're comfortable that the teachers are fairly well trained in that?
yes, and getting better all the time. Getting better all the time, just hearing the conversations. This last October, I suppose, we did a MAP session with just our elementary and middle school administrators on MAP reports again, but this one was specific to data teams. I think I mentioned that. We're getting to that point where, okay, it's not what's the school going to learn and what's the teacher going to learn about Johnny. How are we going to incorporate this data as a useful tool in our PLC teams? And by and large, we're doing that.
Thank you.
Mhm. I can't promise everyone is.
Yeah, that's kind of-
Yeah,
'cause they're only as good as.
they're only as good as what you use them for.
Yeah.
Any other
President Thomas.
questions? Go ahead.
So
But
Val
it's
is,
also, can I make one more point there? It is also for board monitoring. Mike and I, and I'm sure other people that are educators, former teachers, have opinions, Nicole, about SBAC. We're required to do it, but it is a test that tests students on the standard for their grade exclusively. It's not gonna go up, it's not gonna go down. So you know the kind of picture you're getting. You only know what they know about their own grade level standards. These assessments go above and beyond and below, and we know more about the student. And if you're a teacher, that is extremely important information that you get overnight, that we just never had in place before because cost was prohibitive. And now we need to future think, how are we going to continue to support, if not this, something like this, for good instructional practices moving forward once our ESSER funds have been depleted on that. Well, they have been depleted, but we bought 5 years.
so Ms. Sales, I think it would be, as you talk about all the different MAP testing, MAP fluency, MAP growth, MAP accelerator.
Accelerator isn't a test, it's just practice,
Okay.
but yes.
So I think it would be beneficial to have like a little cheat sheet that kind of shows where things overlap and
I have
because,
a really good graphic designer on my staff and it's not me. I can sure ask Andy what she could do with that. In our slides, and Andy worked on this with me, she did a great job. The good, the bad and the ugly, it kind of makes a comparison, but we can make that more graphic if you'd prefer. So you know what is assessed with what assessment. And we can include pricing information if you'd like, because you remember it now, but I'm guessing you probably won't tomorrow.
I think that's valuable. I think we all should buy stock in MAP because I did the
It's
math.
a nonprofit.
9 million students times 1250 is 112 billion or $112,500,000. That's just the MAP growth, I think is what you
Yep.
said. So, oh my goodness. But 1250 is expensive, but I also want to put it into context. 13,000 students, and we don't do it K-12 right now, but 13,000 students times 1250 is $162,500, which is a lot of money, but I thought it was going to be a much bigger number
Mhm.
because it seems like a lot to pay for a student. Also, it's every year and that adds up, of course. We know that, but I think we need to know, like, if we need all of them, then it's.
We do not
right.
definitely, I mean, I can say right now before the pilot's concluded, we don't have to continue it with Acadians if we identify a different universal screener for mathematics, K2, and really, if we want to say MAP growth is our universal screener for 3.8, we just need to revise our handbooks. They already have access to it, but that K2 component really would be hanging out there if we said we're done with Acadians. And again, they are going through a price increase, but it's still only $450. But it's a lot of time to administer. So there's just so many moving parts to this. I can make a recommendation one day and then go into classrooms and really kind of start to change my perspective on that. So I'm glad there's so many people involved in this process, that we have so many students as part of the pilot and so many educators, because all we can do is make our best recommendation and bring it to DDL, and DDL may see it completely differently, but we'll work collaboratively until we have a proposal that the board can either accept or decline.
Thank you.
I have a slew of questions, but
I wonder if you and I
You know,
need to schedule a coffee.
yes. Not just that, but like you said, with the graphic designer, I'm going to go through this again, re-listen to it, map out the different things between the two of a comparison chart that
Mhm.
I'd like to see. Name of the dyslexia screener, because usually they're named.
Well,
and
it's
we've
their
talked about this
dyslexia
before.
screener.
Right, we've talked about this
It is
before. It's not
not- yeah, so
necessarily
we're
a
not-
dyslexia screener. But there's just a number of other things besides the pricing. one of the things that I know that with the maps, we got that through ESSER funds, that's gonna go away. You know, do we have the budget for it? We've already had the Acadians, that was already in the budget. If we continue with that, even if that goes up, it's not as expensive as
You
there's
make a
just a
great
number.
point, but can I say one thing about
Sure.
Acadians? We do pay for that year to year. We don't
Right.
have a long-term license agreement with them, nor were at the time, were they interested in that. I've sat down with Coy, I've done a 5-year worst case scenario and 5-year best case scenario of what TLI it will be requesting out of capital outlay, because the truth is, our instructional resources, our assessments and our subscriptions like Edgenuity are all paid out of capital outlay. And
Sure.
those are all driven through my office. So I spend a tremendous amount of capital outlay dollars, and just knowing that, yeah, that, you know, well, we'll dry up on the
Right.
ESSER funds. We're covered. We don't have to pay anymore. But if we expand, we will. Regardless, we have to have a universal screener. We
Right.
have to have
Yep.
something for progress monitoring. So what is our long range plan? And that's why we're doing this pilot now.
Right.
We don't have to do anything today, and we really don't even have to do anything for next year. But it's time to start thinking about those things.
Right. But I also know that there's some other things that are in depth with the Acadians. One of the very first pages in your chart, it says the purpose of each one. In the purpose of, the only one that is scientifically evidence-based is Acadians, that it mentions it in particular, and it's been used for years. It's evidence-based. So it also follows the child, goes down to the depths of the foundational skills. The computer part literally gives me a nightmare, some heartburn, only because the other thing I would like to see is some speech, the pathologists go through this, because I do this with my own tutoring. It's that first sound, and you have to be able, as
Get
a
your lips
as a
ready. Yep.
tutor, the lips, they have to be able to see that. That's not, a computer's not going to do that. Certainly not going to teach them the phonemic awareness that they need. That
And
is
it's
the
not meant to
foundation.
teach them. It's
Right,
meant to
right.
assess where they are.
Right, and that
There
just
is
scared me that it
no,
was
like,
kindergarten that
accelerator.
was supposed to read that. That's so scary to me. But, and then the other thing is with the headphones, I don't know, kids can go through 2 or 3 pairs. They're just not
Well,
very,
Shane and I were having a philosophical debate about that today already. Like, do you really spend that much on headphones and then put them away so no one can use them until the next test?
I don't,
I
my
personally don't want
12-year-old, I've
Excel
gone through like 3
technology.
pairs a year.
But I did the mini lesson with kindergartners. It was a blast.
Right,
Sat on the carpet with them and I said, here's the headsets you're gonna use for this test. This is your microphone. It's like you're landing airplanes. You talk right into the mic. It doesn't go in your mouth.
Yeah.
It still did it. It
Yeah.
goes up, it goes down, but don't test that. You know,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like,
right.
I know, but they were tough. They were
Yeah.
tough as nails.
Yeah.
But we talked about what we thought the loss ratio would be each year, and we figured 15%.
Right. So anyway, I'm gonna do my homework on this one.
It's
Only-
huge.
Yeah, it is a lot. And then maybe come back and have at least a couple, maybe another study session, talk about this again maybe in the spring or early summer. So,
Yeah, you discuss with the board, see if they're interested, or if it's just you and I that want to talk about it, or
sure.
maybe just a couple of us, whatever works.
Right. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Can I add one thing about the cost?
Sure, go ahead.
Mrs. Seals mentioned it a little bit, but one thing to consider, and I'm not saying MAP or Acadians, I also haven't dug into them enough to say one or the other. But one thing that should definitely be considered is, yes, Acadians is cheaper, but there is that time component of it. And we are paying a teacher that time. That is time that is lost in the classroom and those sorts of things. So I just want to caution us against, in general, not just with this, just going with the cheapest thing, because I mean, think of a
Right,
physical
when you
object,
saw
if you take
that
the
6
cheapest
minutes
thing,
per student,
right? If you take the cheapest
times
thing.
30, times 3 times a year,
mediocre.
times, yeah.
Well, and
so
and
there's-
comparably, that's part of the comparison chart I want as well,
Right.
because the MAPS test takes much longer assessments and it's 3
Right.
times a year, and then Acadians isn't
Not
as
at the
much. So there's a
primary
lot
level.
of different,
Or with
sure, but
the
there,
data
if
we get.
at the 6-minute level
So the benchmark
with the
they say would
the
hit
scientific
15 minutes.
evidence.
I'm sorry, the benchmark for MAP, I have this because I've been doing a lot of research. The benchmark for MAP for our K2 students, because that is a separate assessment, remember,
Right,
is 15 minutes, and they do it concurrently. And then the following subsequent tests for progress monitoring are 4 to 6 minutes, depending on the student's performance, longer if they're performing better.
yeah,
in general, cost versus benefit. is
Well, I
important
heard
to-
that was, cost is
consider.
going up too, so.
Right, yeah.
Mhm. I'm sorry, I spoke over you, but I just didn't want to lose. the
That's okay.
thought.
That's all right. All right, with no other comments or questions, thank you very much. It's a lot of work.
Thanks.
All right, we're on to other. Does anybody have an other?